Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Modern Market. This is our daily show where we discuss everything to do with the modern market. That is the crypto market, the NFT market, and how to make some or a lot of money on the internet. I'm your host, B-Check. I'm joined by my legendary co-host, Legendary. We're going to get into everything that you might want to know about from the last 48 hours over the weekend to get you up to speed with the crypto market and the NFT market and anything else that we think might be of interest. We are going to get to it in just a moment, but as a reminder, friends, that nothing that we say here is financial advice. This modern market is exceptionally risky. We do not know anything for sure, so please proceed with caution and exercise your own judgment. With that out of the way, Legendary, it is Monday. It is a new week. It is the 13th of May. How are you doing? How are you feeling?
GM. Man, quite frankly, it is an overwhelming start to the week. I'm getting sucked up by 3 rabbit holes at the same time.
Oh,
On the one hand, it is IKB, the sports betting platform on Blast, where I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. I burned through 600 USDB yesterday, placed
okay.
another 600 in bets today. But apparently, you make more back in gold than whatever you're betting on there. So I'm just pressing and pushing buttons and look at the outcome. I have absolutely zero clue what is happening or going on down there.
Nice.
Second rabbit hole is since Tiro has started that fashion risk conversation in the YouTube comments last week, I'm now taking the fashion game on the show more seriously to keep the fashion risk level high.
Ooh,
And
okay.
then the third one is we spoke about the show. We spoke before the show about it. The world PvP stuff, the study nuking countries PvP game on base, which I find quite offensive and quite hilarious. I love it.
You're going to need to give a little bit more
Yes,
context on that final one. Just explain what you've discovered is going on base.
absolutely. So there is a game. It's basically an on-chain country knockout tournament. If the fight is which nation will become number one, and each nation is represented by an ERC20 token, and the game is played in rounds. And after every round, the highest market cap country gets a nuke, and they can nuke another country. And the president, which is the token holder who has the highest token amount of the winning country, can choose which country will be eliminated. And by eliminating a country, you're basically rugging their LP, and you split that 50-50 between you as the winning country and the random country. And that goes on until all countries are nuked and eliminated but one. And if you look at the current leaderboard, it's obviously, did it change? Let me check on the website, not on X. Yeah, it's China in the first place, followed by North Korea, followed by
What?
USA, followed by Chad, followed by Palestine and Germany. So the top 6 countries right now. And we're talking about 16 mil in market cap for the top 3 tokens each. Am I adding a zero to this? No, sorry, I'm adding a zero to this. 1.6 mil for the top country.
Okay. So the North Korean devs exercising a huge amount of influence at the moment in the geopolitical stage.
Yeah, I mean, North Korea winning a global knockout, nuke out tournament would be quite mimetic in the Web3 space.
Okay, if you're just waking up, just joining the show, get a little bit late, just talking about the on-chain world domination knockout nuke game, which Legendary has discovered on base. We're gonna need to do a little bit more of a deep dive on this at some point in
Yeah,
time.
it was also the reason why Seneca, for those who maybe got confused about that, posted in the morning study nukes. That was the game behind that tweet.
Got it. Okay, we're gonna have to look into that for sure over the next few days to see if it catches on, and if it becomes something bigger, we'll obviously cover it more and explain it in a bit more detail. But we're gonna get into all the headlines in just a little bit. And of course, we're going to get into the discussion on all of the headlines. Today, we've got things like crypto bouncing back, but Cobie, big crypto trader, thinker, sharing some bearish macro sentiment. We're going to get into that. Next, we're also going to talk about fantasy top cards surging and the kind of details for the new tournament. And finally, we've got Penguins selling more than 101 million plushies and the toys going live in retailer Target. The Penguins are up 10% as a consequence. But let's get into the rest of the headlines and the price action as well to get you up to speed. As always, this is pinned to the top. This is on Snapshot. If you do find some value in it, please do give it a like. Let's get into it. Price action, Bitcoin is up a couple of percent at 62.8K. ETH is at 3K. Solana is flat at $144. Crypto bounces, but Cobie shares bearish macro thoughts. This is what he said. I'm going to read it all. In fact, I'll read it all in a little bit when we get into it. Next, fantasy top cards surge on new hero score. The Tuesday will be the new main tournament, and Thursday there will be a common only tournament. So there will be concurrent tournaments for the first time. And next, Pudgy Penguins sell more than 1 million plushies and toys go live in American retailer Target. The Penguins actually went up 10% to a 12.4 ETH floor. Luca Nets said over 1 million toys sold in the last 12 months as Pudgy Penguins continues its expansion in retailers all over the world. Who would have thought that the consumer crypto revolution was going to be led by fat, flightless birds? Nice commentary there. Getting into some floor prices, we've got CryptoPunks at 38.7 ETH, Bored Apes at 14.1, Mutants at 2.7, DGods at 2.2, Captains at 3, up a couple of percent, Azuki's above 5 ETH, 5.3, up 3%, Penguins up 9% to 12.3, Mad Lads recovering a little bit, back up above 70 Sol. The Nouns winning bid was at 7.2 ETH. We saw a CryptoPunk zero attribute, which is one of the rarest ones, selling for 270 ETH. Huge sale there. And a Bored Ape Trippy Cowboy selling for 85 ETH. Those were a couple of notable sales. That was the price action. Those were the headlines, Legendary. What do you want to get into? Anything catching your attention price-wise before we get into a discussion on the main headlines?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the NFT side of things on ETH looks quite calm on the Mentify heat map. However, there's a lot of nuking going on the Blast side of things, where basically all quote unquote major collections are down massively. Everything is going down on the Blast side of things. I think there's again a couple effects for that. If you look at Game of Gold, NFT Stats had a post about that, now down 50% to a 0.09 floor with a massive holder dumping. Obviously, Blast Penguins, who had won the jackpot, down yet another 30% on the day, total of 70% down over the last 7 days. So it really seems like that you have the post-jackpot dumping, then you have the jackpot frustration dumping when ERC20s are winning and not NFTs. And then you obviously have people who buy in with a considerable amount of NFTs before something rallies, and in the jackpot anticipation, use that momentum to dump on the other farmers as well. So it's quite the PvP out there.
I completely agree with that sentiment. Just to give people, I've got some bigger thoughts on that, but I'm just looking at the Mintify heat map as well. Pluto Cats, the Blast leader for NFTs, down 35% as well, a 1.7 ETH floor. But nothing is exempt here. Blastopians down almost 40% to 0.28 floor. So as you say, really completely aggressive red across the board, I think it's fair to say. One of the thoughts I was having, Legendary, you mentioned, what did you say? You said it was, you said something about it being hyper PvP at the moment and just like dumping across the board. I don't know, but there's different reasons to dump, I think is what you were explaining.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the things I was thinking about, would be keen to hear your thoughts. This was just like my personal reflections, and I'll explain why I took certain decisions as a consequence over the weekend, potentially, or Saturday or Friday. I can't remember. But I just started to think that, I think it was on Friday or Saturday, we've had now a bunch of jackpots that have come out, right? And I think obviously one of the reasons why the Blast team want to incentivize people to, sorry, it's the other way around. One of the reasons for the jackpot's existence is to try to incentivize people to hold these assets. So people obviously at some point in time rushed into certain assets. People were like looking down the gold list, being like, okay, this is the token for District 1. They're surely going to get a token. Oh, the yield token, which is the Crypto Valleys token, that also seems to be getting a lot of gold. Surely that's going to hit the jackpot at some point. So lots of people buying in the same way that when NFTs on blur. People don't actually want to own the asset. They just want to participate in the jackpot for the blur token. Now there's a jackpot for gold and people are buying the assets without actually wanting to hold the assets. So what seems to be happening, and we saw this, I think, with Juice and potentially one other token. Oh, Blast Penguins that won over the weekend. As soon as they win the jackpot, they just immediately dump. And it's starting to, I started to think like, hang on a sec. I don't know if it's worth speculating on this because the amount of gold that you can potentially get might be immediately offset by the amount of ETH that you lose on the trade unless you got into your position very, very early for whatever reason. So I actually started, to the extent that I had some speculative ones open, I sold a few of the speculative ones because I was like, look, I'm not going to be, you don't even know what time that jackpot gets announced, right? It happens. You could be away from the computer for an hour and the nuke's already happened. So I started selling off some of my more speculative ones because I was like, I'd rather just not lose the ETH because I'm not guaranteed the amount of gold. So that's one of my lines of thinking when it comes to buying things specifically for the purpose of getting exposure to the gold. And what I started to think instead was buy things which I want to buy anyway, and therefore keep exposure to the gold. But it's okay because I wanted to hold those things anyway. Do you have any reflections on that, Legendary? Would love to bring NFT stats into this conversation as well, as I know he is kind of monitoring this price action and the jackpot as well.
If you say you're buying things that you really want to buy and hold because of the things itself, what is that on Blast? Where basically almost everything is gold farming. Like, to me, that's very few assets. That's something like NFT stats is GM photography, which I absolutely love. And I love also the gold exposure via Blaster, which I still think is significantly underfarmed. But like from the other things, Blastopians, Plutocats, Hoods, couldn't really, quite honestly, might sound like a brutal take, but don't really care about them outside of the gold. So there's very few things. But was it really curious what it is for you?
So I think at the moment, the thing which seems to have truly, I think with Plutocats, they do actually have this interesting additional mechanic. I remember explaining it back at the beginning where you get you actually get your ETH back. It's like a proportion of the amount of ETH deposited, so which you can always refund back. It's kind of like a spin on the Nouns initial ecosystem. So that is interesting. But to your point about like, what's the thing now that's kind of proving itself outside of the jackpot universe? I think it's Pac-Moon, to be honest. Again, this is a highly volatile asset and there's risk in all of it. You know how last week people were saying, oh, it's completely unfair that these token holders get all this gold when they're not taking any risk. It's like, no, there's significant risk holding Pac-Moon or any of these NFTs, as they can completely nuke at any occasion. So I think there's a lot of risk in it, but I do think Pac-Moon has done something unique. They've done something interesting and innovative and captured the community's attention. For God's sake, they got 3 Beeple every days. Like, they got Beeple's attention and got Beeple to make art about them 3 times, I believe, 2 or 3, at least 2 or 3. So that's like, it's very, very significant what they've achieved in a very short space of time. And I think Dee's put out a tweet which kind of compared 3 charts next to each other. One of them, two of them were jackpot winners that immediately nuked, and then the Pac-Moon chart, which won the jackpot, went up. Yeah. So I think, like, when it comes to studying like winners or trying to back things that are ahead for whatever reason, I feel like that's the thing at the moment. Although, as I said, still huge risk attached to it. How do you reflect on that, Legendary, and then want to bring NFT stats into it?
Yeah, Pac-Man is a very good point. It's also the only ERC20 I kept buying on the dumps, and obviously have been farming it at least since season 3 on the posting side of things. Very much could see them win another jackpot, and quite frankly, even if they don't, I'm already up quite well in my Pac-Moon bags, plus the gold that I've already have received. So that's definitely one where I would agree with you.
Okay. Interesting stuff. Would like to hear other people's perspectives, to be honest, as well. But let's definitely go to NFT stats. Sam first. Sam, welcome to the stage, my friend. What are your thoughts on this kind of Blast NFT token action as it specifically relates to the gold jackpot? do you have any takes on the winners and losers in this situation?
I mean, I think that what Legendary is saying is true, right? Like this. So this was an all DeFi kind of app-based ecosystem, and then they suddenly announced that they're giving 25% of their gold incentive to assets, but there were no assets on the platform because like it just wasn't the incentive until like there was no incentive for it. Like if you actually look at kind of the personalities running the show, it's a bit more of like the DeFi native type of people. But so suddenly you had this massive incentive out there, but no assets. So assets started springing up, but none of them were real. No one felt, I mean, and by real, I just mean no one felt any attachment to them. The only purpose for them was to go after gold. So you just have all these assets whose only purpose is to go after gold. And I think that that's why Pac-Moon stands out. It's because Pac-Moon's been around. It's the one asset that's been around since long before it. It's the reason that people are going after Blastopians a little bit more legitimately, because Blastopians were like the one project that was part of the Big Bang competition, and that had been around a little bit longer. And people thought maybe if Blast becomes a thing over time, this is the first, the first PFP on the platform. Maybe there's a little bit of a story there. But broadly speaking, the only purpose of any of this other stuff is to go after gold. So once the gold hits, you got to get out, or unless I'm kind of curious. Pac-Man said that nothing. That winning the competition doesn't make it less likely you'll win again. And then Pac-Moon won twice and it got a lot of blowback. So who knows if the algo got adjusted, but I don't know. I think what Chris is saying is broadly kind of the way I look at it as well.
Do you think, Sam, that it's like, does Blast need more of the tokens to be big winners, or is it sufficient for a ecosystem at this stage of its development to have one big winner? Like if Pac-Moon is the big winner out of this kind of early set of development from Blast, is that completely fine?
I think it's fine. I think it's fine. At the end of the day, I don't know if this incentive structure is doing what it intended. If basically it leads to Blast Penguins getting pumped to 0.19 and then going to 0.04 the minute everyone who owns one gets like 10 gold or whatever happened. Like, I don't think that the goal of incentive structures is to build ecosystems that entirely revolve around the incentive structure. This has been my criticism of Blur as well. It's like, I think the goal of these incentive structures, like the goal of Blur incentivized bidding was always to make it so you're the highest bid and the lowest offer. So anyone who wanted to own a Bored Ape came onto Blur and that was their destination where they got the best bid and they got the lowest offer. That was always the goal. What happened in reality was the incentive structure was so big that Blur farmers took over the entire ecosystem and just turned the entire ecosystem into a game of pump and dump on each other that scared every real player away. So, I think a lot of times when these incentives are so big, they overtake their objectives. And I think that that's what we're seeing here. I cannot imagine that Pac-Man's goal here was for, Juice Token to go from 0.09 to 0.15. People get gold and for immediately to dump right back to where it started. That just doesn't strike that doesn't strike me as what he's going for.
Yeah, I agree with that. I guess the intention must be to try for it to pump, but then it not to dump. But I guess
the goal is to get real assets over here that people want to hold, like meme coins, like for the next whiff to be on Blast, and for them to initially be incentivized by we should go launch on Blast because people buy it because of the jackpot. Like that's the goal, and then you get real assets over there, and then people are like, holy shit, like the thing everyone's talking about on Twitter, the only way I can get it is if I bridge to Blast. Then TVL goes up. Like that's the goal. I think it's too early to say it hasn't worked. But right now in the interim, I think we're just seeing stuff which I don't think is really what was intended.
Interesting stuff. Thanks for that insight, Sam, as always. Bread, welcome to the stage, my friend. Would love to hear your thoughts, particularly on the incentive structures being created by the Blast jackpot and how you're thinking about this kind of aggressive price action as it relates to the NFTs and the tokens.
Yeah, GM dudes. So I just I'm going to push back and say, because I think you guys are off on what the incentive was, or at least for me, if I'm building an ecosystem, like it's not to make people hold shit to like artificially inflate prices. Yes, it might be to lure people over a little bit, but I honestly think it's mostly just to get people within the ecosystem to spread their wings. Like I haven't been on Blast for months. I literally avoided it intentionally for this purpose because it's kind of a Ponzi chain and whatever. So, but I came over because of Fantasy Top and like, all right, I'm going to try to be efficient over here. Learning about the jackpot, it's like, okay, if I'm going to be in this ecosystem and be efficient, I need to spread my wings and have a little bit of everything in order to like be efficient, right? To get a potential allocation of this jackpot and the most likely things, pack moon, all this stuff. So I honestly don't think it's for like artificial price stuff, maybe a little bit of luring projects, yes, but I think ultimately it's trying to get people rooted in the ecosystem by forcing them with incentives to spread their wings out. Now I have a bunch of fucking assets on this chain that I didn't intend to stay long, and now I have a home base, right? Like and I think that ultimately is what, and I agree, like, yes, show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcome. We're absolutely seeing that with a lot of these things propping up around the incentive structure. But I think the ultimate purpose, at least on the Pac-Man side, was to try to get deep-rooted, long-lasting users by making them like spread out a shit ton within his ecosystem.
I like that take. I guess it's the idea that you need to get people into the ecosystem, because even as recent as this morning, someone commented in my tweet saying, "Oh, they still haven't bridged over," and there's actually multiple people who haven't bridged over for various reasons. I'm sure someone somewhere will get tempted by the jackpot, whether it's Fantasy Top, whether it's the jackpot itself, and then at least they're over, right? So yes, there'll be some maybe kind of aggressive price action in the interim as people are speculating, but that means they've got some ETH in Blast, and after which you might be able to attract their attention again to do something else, and you're less likely to think, "Oh, I can't be bothered because I don't have anything over there," but you've at least got some there. Interesting. I appreciate that take as well. Tiro, want to throw to you right here and now, because you were that person in my comments saying you have not been tempted over. What's your take on the aggressive price action? Is this conversation that we're having now more likely to bring you over or less likely?
Hey, good morning, Modern Market fam. So I would say I'm indifferent at this point in time. I don't see the incentives for someone to be a late mover now to do it. You're kind of you're behind the 8 ball as far as gold allocation and understanding the ecosystem. And there's a lot of plays and a lot of NFTs and a lot of protocols that are coming out. And even Fantasy Top, who had their big blast off meeting at Friday afternoon, which I was a part of, which was good, kind of, but also a little weird. They had a lot of stock music that they were really blasting the whole time, and there was a lot of interaction, and the way they used the Twitter video process instead of doing a normal space was a lot different. So you couldn't see who was like exactly in there. You could see a count, and there was over 30,000 people in there. So obviously attention is on blast. So it's there, but now how do you go from 30 to 100,000? And you don't do that if you don't have people have easy ways to onboard. I don't even have a blast code, so I haven't even started step one.
I sent you my code, Tiro. I sent you my code.
See, he's reaching out. See, this is what needs to happen to get more users on the platform. You need to bring in new users, and even if I was interested in Fantasy Top or this new fantasy like DraftKings type daily fantasy thing, I don't have the blast code, and then I have to bridge over, and then it's like
okay,
there's the learning curve.
I send you the code. Just bridge over. Just bridge over. Get in the game. Get in the game.
I'll bring it. I promise. I promise to do my due diligence, because I'm a part of the community. I'm following it, so obviously I understand it and I get it. But you have to look at your opportunity costs, where
for sure
everyone's running the blast,
yeah,
and
so
you
look,
have to look at the other opportunities too.
I do take your point that it's obviously kind of attracted the majority of mindshare now, and therefore it is certainly later than it was for other people. So definitely take your point there. Interesting. So I don't think you're the only person who thinks that. Legendary, you want to bring this topic to a conclusion, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, I think that's actually a very good point to be in Tiro's shoes and think like everyone has farmed a shit ton of gold. Do I even want to join the game at this point? It will be interesting to see how the season 2 of Blast will be designed to kind of keep the farmers farming, but also to reset the slate to a certain extent, and also attract new people who obviously will see the TGE, will feel like they missed out on that and want to jump in and FOMO in on that. So that will be interesting to look at that incentive structure in the future in a couple of weeks.
For sure. My final point before we get into the macro look, the fantasy top news and the Pudgy Penguin news, because we're going to deal with those issues all in turn. My final point is forget the gold, forget the other kind of Ponzi incentives that sometimes have rubbed people the wrong way, triggered people to some extent. I just think the statistics coming out of Fantasy's top, for example, if you are, and I'm not saying you have to be or that you should be, if you are a pure trader at the moment, and if you're like looking for opportunities, I'm pretty sure, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but Fantasy Top did more volume than all ETH NFTs, like on a couple of the days last week. I don't think I'm making that up. I'm almost certain that that was one of the statistics. And so if you're like here to be a participant, to, you know, try to be changing some ETH for more ETH by trading certain things, it's just a point about following liquidity at this point, I think. So that's one of the things I would think about, obviously taking into account that you can follow the liquidity and get wrecked, because to Legendary's point earlier, it's very, very PvP at the moment. So that's something to point out. Glad we had that conversation. We're going to do a little bit more on Fantasy Top in a little bit. But let's get into the bigger discussion for the day, where crypto's kind of bounced back up. We've been in a period of chop here for quite some time, just going between 60K, 63K, 64, 59, 61, like just in that region. People seem to be a little bit happy. Then Cobie shared this tweet, which in the tweet, he's started saying people are going to completely take this out of context. They're going to deal with this in a way that is far too important than it probably should be, as they always do, because he is seen or held in such high regard when he discusses his ideas out loud. The preface to it is that he obviously says he's not an expert in macro, and actually that's why he is more likely to share his ideas on macro, because he can say he's not an expert in it. But anyway, you want to know what he said. It's actually hidden for people who he hasn't allowed to follow, but I've got it up on screen and we'll be able to share it with you. So this was his thoughts. Very interested to hear people's perspectives. He said, when I tweeted about Goldilocks window in December, I basically meant I'm worried about any form of sustained rally, i.e. a multi-year bull market, because we're in a Goldilocks window. Nice conditions where the US economy seems to be doing well, but not likely to sustain. And now it seems that the US economy slowdown is starting to show, not just in anecdote, but also in data. And I don't really understand how the market will react to this deterioration or risk of recession, but typically, historically, it doesn't seem good for risk assets. However, until actual Fed action, maybe you can't really make any changes, and market reacts well to bad news because it expects cuts, ? But to me, cuts seem like bad news. Maybe the Fed cuts late and they cut because they need to cut. Also, the whole thing is complicated by the US election, which we've spoken about before as like a big factor, where Bidenomics likely doesn't want extreme consumer pain and recession during their re-election campaign, although that's maybe unavoidable now with high consumer debt. So a variety of factors being voiced here by Cobie, kind of being, I guess, concerned is probably the best way to describe the current situation, even if that's kind of like a okay outlook for the short term, in essence, because it feels like no sitting president will allow the economic situation to be too bad as it kind of comes to re-election. But there's clearly a deep-seated concern here from probably one of the best traders, thinkers in the space. Would like to hear your thoughts on this, Legendary, and then would love to hear from NFT Stats and Bread as well if they want to come in.
Yeah, there's so many bits and pieces to that. Kind of want to start off maybe on the election topic,
Sure.
Just because it's the last one that you mentioned. I think the US election is something that people love to look at when it comes to stock market data, when it comes to how the S&P 500 performs. And if you look at some of those stats, S&P has had so far 73% of the years returning a positive return, 27% of the years returning a negative return. Election years are a bit above that. They are sitting at 83%. On average, the return is a bit higher if Republican versus Democrat president are being elected. But also, and that's me quoting from both a paper by Morgan Stanley as well as the research by US Bank, both of them are also concluding that, yes, people love to look at US election. Yes, there is an impact. And if typically you have an election happening, there's a rally, it tends to happen after the election. But however, other metrics such as growth metrics, inflation, et cetera, so like the key economic data points have a way stronger correlation with how the S&P 500 returns will play out in a specific year compared to the impact of the US elections. Obviously, it's like a very political topic, but to that extent, it's also a bit overrated in terms of how it impacts, at least specifically in that year, the market. One extension on that thought, and I will go back to Cobie's post, however, is that we now see crypto being more and more discussed as part of the US elections. Some people like that, some people hate that. I personally think it's a very good thing because it just shows that crypto has now become relevant enough to be deemed important enough to be part of the marketing campaign for certain candidates, and to include that on their political agenda. Whether they mean that seriously or not is not the point. It's just it's deemed relevant enough to swing votes, so we touch on it. And to the other points, in terms of the US economy slowing down, also in terms of the still high inflation, even though it has corrected down a bit. Yes, those are all very, very concerning points, plus the political instability that we are seeing globally. So, and last but not least, markets are still very close or at an all-time high, depending on which indices you look like. And obviously, all-time highs are not holding up forever. So there's definitely also reasons to be concerned for the market, at least for the midterm.
Okay. Interesting take on the kind of election cycle there. Would love to throw to NFT stats to kind of think about, okay, I don't know to what extent you agree or disagree on the significance of the election cycle to determine kind of crypto price action or broader macro sentiment, but maybe taking that away, not thinking as much about the election stuff. Are the stats out of the US starting to concern you yourself?
I mean, the whole narrative until now is that bad news is good news, right? And it's, you know, we've been in, and that's not uncommon because stock markets tend to forecast interest rates. You know, if the world thinks that interest rates are going lower, you know, that tends to be good for markets. If the world thinks that interest rates are going higher, that tends to be bad for markets. It's why, you know, it's why Bitcoin was not a good inflation hedge. Like when inflation happened, that was when people started predicting rate hikes, and that was bad for Bitcoin, you know? So I think the idea, what he's basically calling for, it sounds like, is a bit of a paradigm shift away from, you know, we still have Fed fund rates, you know, above 5%. So I think above 5%. Sorry if I got that wrong. So if we get to a world where there is deterioration and that leads to an interest rate cycle improving, at least over the past year, that is something the market has interpreted very positively. So he seems to be calling for a switch in that paradigm to one where bad news is bad for markets, which is a pretty aggressive call, I'd say, just because it's just the opposite of the way things have been trading for a pretty long time. So I don't know. I think I have a very hard time getting too deep into crypto people's macro views just because those markets are so efficient. It's so hard for me to be like, this is it. But that's not to say we shouldn't be taking swings. I respect it. But by the same token, I have a hard time myself saying like, oh, he's wrong. I just think these are very efficient markets. And you know, it's hard for me to feel like I have a lot of alpha there.
Fair enough. I think that's a very interesting perspective, interesting point on how, I guess it's kind of the opposite of how things have played out before, with bad news traditionally meaning good news for markets. So interesting to think about that. Let's go to Funky with your hand raised. We've got Akin with his hand raised too, and then we're going to need to switch it up and get to the other two topics for the day. Funky, welcome to the stage, my friend. What are your thoughts on this kind of macro potential bearishness?
Jim, everybody, I hope I'm not repeating anything Sam or T Rose said. I couldn't hear them come through on the mic. But either which way, I think that the two things always stick out in my mind. One, Bitcoin has always lived in this very, low interest rate environment from its inception. It started when the first Great Recession happened, and then we've had the Fed continue to reduce rates. And the only time I really ever saw that was, I think, December of 2018 when they started to try and correct, and then they put the faucets back on. And I think the other thing too is it doesn't really matter who wins the White House. If you look at the previous bull cycles and the elections, it was first it was Obama, then it was Trump, then it was Biden. Like Bitcoin still does its thing at the halving cycles. So I think it's anybody's guess. There could be a black swan, there could be anything, but this is also one of the main reasons why I distrust all the $250,000 coin and everything else. So, I mean, it's
Funky, you've just started breaking up for us there. I don't know. I think you're lifting too heavy in the gym potentially. Let's go to Akim. We'll try and come back to you later on a different topic, Funky. Akim, welcome to the stage, my friend. Give us a final take on the kind of Cobie macro sentiment, how you're thinking about the market generally moving as we move further along in the election cycle.
Yeah, so I think just one thing to know that's really important. I think there needs to be a distinction between sort of the rate environment and the liquidity environment, right? And what a lot of people don't realize is over the last couple of years, the Fed has pumped about 3 times more money into the banking system than it did during the Great Recession, right? And these are just not obvious things to people, but at the end of the day, liquidity drives asset prices much more so than other economic indicators, right? During COVID, asset prices went through the roof because of the massive liquidity that was pumped into the system, even though there are parts of the economy that are pretty much dead, right? The stock market did well, housing did well. So I would also just caution people to really watch the money flow, right? Because if the Fed is pumping money into the banking system, which by some accounts has been broken for a few years, as long as that capital is continues to be pumped in to prop the system, then you have to think asset prices will continue to grow. And if we're in a deteriorating market environment in terms of the real economy, and I think we're beginning to see some signs of that, then interest rates start kind of being unraveled, right? Because you never want to destroy the economy. So that creates another potential source of just more money flowing into the system because debt becomes cheaper. So I would definitely watch like the total sum of liquidity, not just sort of how interest rates impact the economy. And I think you'll sort of have a more rounded answer because of that.
Interesting. That's a really helpful perspective, Akin. Thank you for sharing. We're going to have to move on and get into the fantasy top stuff. We also want to touch on the Penguins news. But I guess some big news from the weekend coming out was the new tournament, which is coming out for Fantasy Top. If you are still not familiar, Fantasy Top is the kind of SocialFi game that's been taking over the timeline, if we're being perfectly honest, doing more volume in trading than all ETH NFTs combined, because this is where the attention is right now. This is where the liquidity is right now. This is why we are covering right now. And also it's kind of fun, to be completely honest. So they're obviously setting up these different competitions. It's based on the heroes, which is the cards that you buy, their Twitter performance. They've had a bunch of issues with botting and other types of tweaks that they're having to deal with as part of the first round, but they've got new tournaments coming and they've suggested that they've got some fixes for those initial issues. So this is the key news. Tyler tweeted that we first have today, we'll learn more about the hero score, which is how people will accrue their points, what type of metrics will be most valued. And therefore you'll be able to figure out how best to pick your deck of heroes. On Tuesday, which is tomorrow, we will have the next main tournament where there'll be 333,000 of gold in prizes, pretty substantial. And then on Thursday, there'll be the first common only sub tournament. So they've announced 2 tournaments this week. The first time there'll be 2 tournaments running concurrently. Legendary, what are your headline thoughts on Fantasy Top? The kind of new details that have shared. The only other thing for me to give people the lowdown is that prices have really, really pumped across the board after the new heroes were added. So I think it was on Friday or Saturday, 40 new heroes were added. People were concerned about that supply. What's it going to do to price action? The answer to that question is people do not mind. They have eaten up the new heroes and the prices across the board are up. Legendary, some key reflections and thoughts. Would love to go to Brad as well to discuss some strategy for Fantasy Top this week.
Yeah, absolutely. There's been this viral video by Clemente who was a bit worried about the inflation or the differences in inflation of certain heroes, where someone like Tyler only gets a couple of cards, and some of the bigger new heroes have hundreds of cards. But again, the fantasy team said they have a pretty good plan on how they want to go about the supply of cards. And as you said, more importantly, because the team will obviously say that the market has had no issues with that so far. And I think people who have followed that announcement of the update to the new scoring mechanism with version 0.3 were able to trade a bit on that alpha, because one of the main points was to refine the scoring for OG heroes. That's the discussion that we had on the large influencers who just relatively have a smaller reach per 1,000 followers than the smaller ones, and we're at a disadvantage. That disadvantage could or will be eliminated, and we've seen people like Pranksy and others shooting up in price significantly. And I think another key update that is also still good to trade on, it's a bit harder because it's not as straightforward as just large accounts won't have a disadvantage anymore, is that frequent posters won't have a disadvantage anymore. Because obviously you have people who post 20, 30 times a day, and then they get less reach per post than people who are posting maybe like once a day or once every couple of days, and like kind of saving that ammunition up. And there's definitely some people, especially in the new hero lineup, who post like 20 or 30, 40 times a day. And if that quote unquote disadvantage will be removed for them as well, I can see them perform quite well. I also think that, and that's the final thought on that the commons only tournament can be interesting. I've seen some speculation going around that it will also be limited to the amount of stars that a hero has. People are speculating they might be limited to 5-star heroes or below only. And having those like very specific tournaments and kind of increasing the frequency and also like the conditions of tournaments makes a lot of sense, because ultimately you do want a diverse like hero base that is being played. I think every card game is optimizing for that by looking which cards are played most, which cards are played the least, how can we create mechanisms, game modes, structures, like talking from that as a perspective of like former Hearthstone and Marvel Snap player, to get card usage going. And I think also if you really want to dive into that, one site I can recommend is fantasydata.xyz. They have a premium subscription to it, which is refundable. I think it's 0.2 ETH and refundable, similar to how all the Blaster NFTs work. So for those who want to trade the market and not play the game, or want to do both, that might be an interesting thing to look into.
Amazing. There were some really, really helpful points there. So thank you for sharing those in detail. Definite helpful stuff when thinking about like the tweaks that the team have been making to try to optimize for this new week of tournaments. We have to go to Brad, who's been posting awesome Fantasy Top tournament all week last week. Brad, what's your thought on the updates from the Fantasy Top team, and how are you strategizing for this week of tournaments? I read one of your previous tweets. You said you're maximizing for fan, not gold. I know the gold takes the headlines a lot. You are more interested in fan. What are your thoughts on the general updates, as well as what's your thinking there by optimizing for fan?
I think regardless of what they're doing with the updates, I'm glad they're keeping things updated because it keeps things interesting. We saw the same stuff with Friendtech, where week over week we didn't know like the best strategy to get points, and part of the fun was figuring that out and changing and doing stuff and shifting week over week. So I think for this thing to have longevity, they need to keep iterating like they are. So, you know, TBD on if we think it's fun or useful with the changes, but it's good that they're doing it and they're doing it quickly. I still, my biggest thing, so one, yes, I'm trying to optimize for fan. I'm trying to identify if you should actually Sybil this thing, because Sybiling was a massive cook for people who did it with Friendtech. I did not, unfortunately. But I'm trying to see how they distribute fan here, because these cards, like all this shit is off chain, which I don't think anyone really has wrapped their head around yet. Like you can't see the actual cap of individual cards. I guess we know the actual cap of, or not actual cap, but we know like how the pricing of the packs work, but you can't see the actual cap of the cards, even though they say that there's a cap. The entire marketplace is off chain, right? You can't sit there and hit a contract to see what's going on. You can't transfer these cards between accounts. Like, there's a lot of things that the metadata. I can't even get the picture of the fucking card from the contract. So like, a lot of this shit is off chain, which is aggravating for me. And now I want to know, like, if the best way to accumulate points for this shit is through one account or through 25 accounts or through 150 accounts or whatever. I'm gonna kind of look at it and see how they operate. So that's my strategy, is just try to accumulate low class cards, commons, whatever, and see if like I can just enter as many tournaments as I possibly can to earn like a minimum reward or something. Just see how that looks. And then, yeah, I still think all the takes, I came after Clemente on his take the other day too, because again, everyone is trying to act like this is some creator, like this game is not made for creator earnings. It's not made for like, oh, now Tyler D's not going to get volume on his card and then he's not going to be incentivized to tweet. Like, that was never the fucking point. Like, the point was Tyler to continue to do what Tyler does, like indirectly, and then the ecosystem, the actual like inflation of high performant cards should be low, because you don't want to flood the market with the best card, right? So like, I think they're prioritizing things appropriately, which gives me confidence in the fan token being good, because again, they're earning a lot of fees and they're managing the actual game. The actual inflation is good, and not trying to like cater to creators and whining about earning enough. So yeah, I think I'm encouraged, and I'm looking at Sybil's versus whatever. So that all comes down to fan distribution by these different tournaments.
Nice.
I think you can transfer, by the way. I think if you just go to Blur and transfer your card, I think it does transfer it. Have you tried that, Brett, or am I wrong?
So, okay, so that was actually something I was going to try. I saw someone commented on it in one of my threads that like, yeah, they're non-transferable. So I was going to check that today. So if you can actually do it through Blur, because I saw you can actually buy through Blur, and I actually went into the contract, and again, the listing isn't actually on the contract, which is aggravating. Like, there's no marketplace so you can actually do. So I'll check that contract today. But
I think they're just NFTs. I think they're as easy to transfer as any other NFT. But I haven't done it myself, but that functionality is certainly there. That's why it won the NFT jackpot.
Yeah. You can do that. I'm logged into my fantasy top wallet on Blur, and I can select my cards and hit the transfer button.
Nice.
Oh, sick. Okay, cool.
That's pretty cool.
So take back transferable, but the rest of the off-chain stuff is fucking annoying to me as someone that lives on chain.
Interesting stuff. One follow-up question for me, Brad, is in terms of your actual kind of concerns about supply and how you decided to play it in the end. I know last week we were kind of speculating what the impact of the supply would be. How did you play it as that new supply hit the market? How did you read it when all this stuff was coming and then it seemed like it got bought up? Were you a bidder? Were you a buyer? What was your strategy?
Well, you had to be a bidder because the buying was broken, because it's all it's their marketplace, right? So, and their marketplace was broken, and it defaults to the lowest, and the lowest was a broken listing, which means you couldn't buy anything above that. So you had to be a bidder this weekend, and I was on a lot of the stuff. I got some rares, and like I tried to go up and down the ladder a little bit, but I prioritized just accumulating old commons because I thought people would rotate to the new stuff just because it's new, even though it's going to have the exact same performance as some of the older ones.
Sure. So
try to do that. Yeah, that's what I did. I just accumulated commons on bids.
Nice.
And as for the supply stuff, yeah. So one thing we're learning, or I'm trying to learn, is how they actually implement new packs, right? They have a contract where they add packs to it. Each pack has like 4, 5, 6, 7, however much you want, and you can see all the raw numbers. So that was something I was tracking because I could actually see it in the contract, and trying to see how much, like they injected 5 new packs or 7 new packs, whatever it was, after the tournament. I was trying to see how much of those were actually minted for just this tournament, and just to see what that supply flow was. And yeah, there was a huge injection. Listings shot up like 40%, and then all of a sudden they nuked all of the listings because again they control the market, had to reset it. So then it went down to like 6,000, and then yeah. So I'm just trying to see how the team moves and how the actual injection, like the process works, since this was the first post-tournament reward dump. So I'm just going to take notes and adjust in the future.
Nice. I actually agree with you that part of the fun is like figuring out, like part of the discussion, the fact that we get to talk about it today, we were speculating on Friday, like not being able to see perfectly into the black box of how it works is part of what's interesting about it. So I like that point. Before we move on to the final...
one more sentence on that real quick. Quick correction. I just tried to transfer on Blur. The transaction failed. So my bad. You're right on that, Brad.
Okay.
Nice. Well, not nice, but nice that I was right.
Before we move on, definitely want to just go to NFT stats to kind of hear how you're playing this, Sam. What's your kind of strategy? To what extent are you participating? I definitely do think that you have been consuming more coffee to pump out more since the tournaments have started. Is that how you're playing it at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think Brad's right. I think sorry, I got a cold. Hold on.
Oh,
sorry. I mean, I think he's right. The idea is to just do your thing. The reality is, as a creator, you end up getting a lot of pressure. People spend a lot of money on you, and you want to crank stuff out. So I was a little frustrated because they said that like creators would get their earnings like a week ago, and now they're saying it's not going to be for 2 weeks.
Oh,
because they're working on all this new technology. I'm like, guys, sending someone ETH they've already committed is not that hard. Just send the ETH and then figure out the technology for later. So I feel you. I certainly know that the least sympathize with Snowflake on Twitter is the creator who's making money. So I'm not going to go too much down that path. But, they've made $12 million, and it is on really the marketing of a lot of people who, are part of it. On that $12 million, only 10% of pack sales goes to the people whose identities are being sold. So I was a little frustrated that they said, sorry, that they said that they're not going to distribute the earnings. Like I did take 2 days of workday and devote a lot of energy to this. And then so that was a little bit annoying, but I guess you kind of just got to trust the process. I personally don't love it when teams are dunking on people like Clemente. It's just not my style. So when they're using their platform to make fun of people who disagree with them, to me, that hurts trust a little bit, just as someone who wants to be able to speak my mind and assume that that's not going to matter in an industry like ours. So there have been a few things that I've found a little bit off-putting. That said, like whenever I DM them, they're responsive and nice. So I don't know. I'm personally not buying cards, not for any reason other than I don't really feel like I have much of an edge there, and it just hasn't really been my style. But there's certainly money to be made. I mean, at the end of the day, based on my estimates, these guys are giving out $3 million a tournament of gold. Like an economy is going to form around that. Like that's just facts. Especially you're giving out $3 million a week in gold. Like, yeah, there's going to be an economy around that. And I think we're certainly seeing that.
Very, very interesting points. Important to sometimes raise those counter ideas as well, because everyone's getting very, very caught up in it. So I think it's very, very fair. Interesting to learn on that. Let's get into, I think we want to try to pivot now to the final headline. We're not going to have long for it, because before we want to do that, we just want to get people up to speed with everything else that's been happening in the space from the Web3 roundup. As always, it's in the snapshot, which is pinned up top. Some quick hits from what else you might want to know about. On the ordinal side, we don't speak about that much anymore. On the ordinal side, it remains cool. Quantum Cats are showing strength at 0.37 BTC, but Node Monks are now down to 0.29 BTC, and Puppets are at 0.2. So a bit of a decline there across the board. Number two, this was really cool. 9gag of Memeland announces a 100,000 Hong Kong dollar bonus for employees for each newborn, and $1 million Hong Kong bonus for 10 years loyalty. That's pretty awesome. I just thought that was pretty cool for a Web3 organization to be stimulating their employees in that way. Next, Chimp has announced collectible card drops on Base. That's kind of exciting, seeing some stuff going on Base still. Next, synthetic dollar leader Athena collaborates with EtherFi to allow USDE deposits. I've been quite big on looking into both of those protocols, so interesting to see those two collaborate. Famous GameStop account Roaring Kitty returns with a locked-in gaming meme, the one where you're holding the gaming controller and just leaning forward, making people think that it's time to get locked in. Mark Cuban tweets strong defenses for crypto and argument to disband SEC over the weekend. Showing quite a lot on being kind of a pro-crypto stance. And finally, Franklin Templeton CEO says all ETFs and mutual funds will be on the blockchain. Nice, further backing up from traditional institutions about the pro reasons for blockchain. Legendary, we don't have much time left. That is the majority of the show. We didn't quite get to the headline for Pudgy Penguins this week, which was also very significant. For the people who might have missed it, Luca announced they sold more than 1 million plushies, and toys were now live in the retailer Target. Penguins went up 10% to 12.4 ETH. Do you have any reflections, Legendary, on the kind of significant Pudgy news?
I think they're just continuing very, very successfully their track with the Pudgy toys. Obviously, moving into Target is a very, very significant step. But given that we are almost at time, I don't have a more complex analysis of that. But I do know that Tiro wanted to come on that real quick because he had a bit of an interaction with Luca on that topic.
Okay. Tiro, final take to close out the show. What are your thoughts on the Penguins' big news?
Yeah, it's great news. Excited for Luca and the team and all the Penguin holders. The one thing that I surmised last Saturday, so what was it, 9 days ago, I was in my local Target in the card and collectibles section looking for something for one of my cousins for a birthday present. And I wasn't looking for it, but I saw the Pudgy Penguins. And I was like, oh, cool, man. I don't own any Pudgy Penguin assets. I support and follow Luca. I grabbed them, I put them in my cart, and I took a picture. I had a basket, a Target basket, and all the Penguins. I had 8 of them. There's 10 different ones, and then I had to go to a different Target to get the other one. So I tweeted this out, that the Target cart or the bin with the Penguins in it, the new clip-ons that are brand new. I didn't know they were new. I don't follow it that closely. I was just like, cool. I want to, this would be a nice gift. Sure. Cool. What I didn't know is I got this is like 10 a.m. on Saturday morning. I got a DM from Luca saying, hey, can you take, so I posted the picture and made a post about it, and I got tons of engagement. And I was very confused why I got so much engagement so fast. The Penguin community was all over it. They saw their Penguins, especially the ones that hold it, that are being, put into real life form and in real life plushies, which is amazing for them. So obviously engagement was high. And I was shopping the rest of the day, and I didn't have cell service. So I didn't even look at my Twitter DMs until like 2 p.m. So Luca had texted me or DM'd me at about 10:20 for first. He said, please take down this post. We haven't released this news to the holders. I was like, oh my goodness, that's okay. Yeah, let me delete it right away. This is it. I didn't even see it till 2 o'clock. And then again at 1 o'clock, I got like a bunch of exclamation points. So obviously he was worried.
Fair enough.
I felt for him. So I apologized, and I said there was no ill will or malice.
Sure.
I was just trying to be a consumer of your products. I support it, and I owe him a picture. I said I bought a bunch of Penguin assets. I'm going to take a picture of it and send it to you, and awesome, hopefully man. That blow it out. And so I support the community. So
that's props cool.
to them, and that's a good move on Target. And but hey, do better on comms is what I have to say. Luca,
yeah, that feels kind of weak.
Yeah. Here's the thing about retailers. As soon as they get product in their back room, because I work in this industry, I've worked in the alcohol industry, and I know how back rooms work and how they put product out. As soon as they get it, they don't want it in the back room. They want to get it to the sales floor. If it's not on the sales floor, they can't make money, right? So get your comms together and understand. I know he's young and you're building it public, and it's very difficult. Hire someone like NFT Bark who frequents this show, who has the background and industry knowledge to be able to put out comms and PR and relations. Hire someone that could help promote people within this community that have backgrounds in Web 2 and bring them into Web 3. So thanks for letting me share the story.
Awesome.
Thanks, guys.
That's a cool story, man. That's cool. It's cool that you managed to get it beforehand. Interesting that it was already live. But great for the Penguins that it's now announced and that is out there. Market seemed to respond very, very positively too. So thanks for sharing that, Tiro. That brings us to the close of the show for today. We hope you enjoyed it. We will be back again tomorrow. As always, just a reminder, we do this every single day, Monday to Friday, 7 a.m. Eastern time, where we kick off. We get into everything to do the NFT market, crypto market, and increasingly the fantasy top market too. Thank you so much, Legendary, for co-hosting as always. Thank you to our contributors, Bread, NFT Stats, Funky, Akin, and Tiro. And thank you so much for joining us. We will be back with you tomorrow. Take care and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.